Damon coming in. All right. Well, welcome everyone. It is, what day is it? It is Thursday, I've been told, October 23rd. We are all here again for our Boundaries Committee meeting tonight. Welcome everyone that's here. Superintendent Scallon and I were at a conference today up in Augusta. Um, and we watched a keynote speaker, and one of the things that the keynote speaker invited us to do in our jobs back here in the district is to really highlight joy every day, which I thought is incrementally hard sometimes. But I thought we could start our icebreaker in the chat with just what is something that brings you joy about our district. So feel free to just take a minute. When you've got something, you can put it in the chat. And Superintendent Scallon, if you can move Annie over, that would be awesome. The kids, they are pretty great. Yeah, I as part of our engagements that we've been doing, we got to sit down with a bunch of young people from Paths High School, and it was just such a great conversation. And they just they just were asking for more rigor and more opportunity, and it was just a really, really wonderful conversation. And the visions of their future are just really, really awesome. It made me really proud of the opportunities that we're offering. Um, let's see, Ariel said that she's had the chance to visit a few different schools lately, and it's just a great atmosphere, feeling the energy and creativity. Beautiful. Yeah, Bill Lamb, the importance of community, for sure, for sure. People really are showing up in this district, and that is awesome. Priscilla said, when we work together as a team to support families and we get to see those results of the work. Yeah, yeah, for sure. Community connections, Damon says, between people of all ages and walks of life. Yeah. The staff care so much about their work and students, from Myelina. That is so true. Just go to drop off at any elementary school. My gosh, it is like the best time of day. If you ever need like a pick me up, man, it's just great. Passionate parents, teachers, children, people who care. Yeah, Rob, agreed. There's some deep caring happening right now. East End had 2 high school seniors visit during conference just to say hi to former teachers. Oh, I love that. I love that. Watching neighborhood kids walk to school, chatting with each other around the neighborhood. Yeah, that sense of community is just so, so beautiful when we see it, especially when it happens in like unexpected ways. So appreciate you all sharing that tonight. And hopefully we can all work that into our practice, just a little bit more joy. So also I see board member Ali on the attendee side. Superintendent, if we could move him over, that'd be great. So tonight we've got a couple things on our agenda. First of all, I'm gonna do a summary of the feedback that we've been hearing from the community, kind of talking about where we've heard that feedback, what the feedback has been so far, and then I'll invite you all to contribute to that in terms of what you've been hearing in your communities from, yeah, from what you've been hearing in your communities. We'll have an opportunity to just like reflect on that. I've got some reflection questions for us. Then we will talk about a little bit more. Superintendent will talk about budget and policy pieces, and then we'll have another time to reflect. So I don't think that we'll have any consensus voting tonight or anything like that. We're mostly just going to be in talking about policy and feedback, and policy. And remember last time we met, we talked about implementation, right? And all the possibilities we're looking at for implementation. Part of that is around policies, and then part of that is around kind of like timing of who does what when. That second part takes a little bit longer to get numbers around, so that's going to be the focus of our next meeting. But tonight we'll look at relevant policies that we might be able to adjust, or we wouldn't be adjusting them, but we'd be making a recommendation to the board. So with that, I'm going to just put our Miro link into the chat if you're not already in there. And then I will go ahead and share my screen so folks can follow where I'm at. All right. Great. Looks like you are able to see my screen now, which is beautiful. So let's just remind ourselves of those priorities that we've defined through this process. Balancing utilization, balancing demographics, which is really at this point economically disadvantaged numbers, trying to uphold neighborhood schools, which means walkability, that you can get there, taking into consideration transportation, and to minimize our impact. So I'm going to just kind of go through the feedback that we've started to receive. And Superintendent, I couldn't remember what other PTOs you had been to. So please let me know and I'll add them to the list. But so this is a list of the thoughts, and as much as possible, some of these are like direct words from people that we have gathered over the course of the last couple of weeks as we've been doing engagement sessions. And this list includes feedback from staff engagement sessions that were board members with just staff. And in those sessions, we've had bus drivers, we've had teachers, and we've had ed techs in those sessions. We have done a lot of family engagement sessions at this point. One of those was a big session with multilingual families, which was really helpful. We've also, superintendent and some other board members, I have not been able to get to the PTOs, but the superintendent Scallon and other board members have been going to PTOs. So Ocean Ave, Presumpscot, Lyseth, Moore. I know Row is tonight, and we've got a couple more to keep going at. We've also had a lot of word of mouth. I don't know about you, but people catch me out in the world and just want to share their thoughts about this and ask questions, which is great. And then we've had a decent amount of emails to the board and the superintendent that I've tried to capture here. And is there anything else, superintendent or board members or anybody else, any other form of feedback that we've gotten so far? Okay. And you'll see as we get into this feedback and these, kind of things that we're hearing, some are like very specific to neighborhoods or streets or blocks. Some are specific to schools. Some are just specific to living in Portland. And I would just couch this that like, woo, come back to me. I'll lock you. I'll lock it. Hold on. There we go. And I would just couch this in, when you seek feedback, you get feedback. And so there have not been a lot of people in these sessions that are coming to express, yes, I really like this plan. Let's move forward with it right now. But that is pretty normal. Like anytime that we go and socialize something in the community, mostly we hear from people who want to make it different or better, or better and different. So I just want to kind of like couch this feedback in that as well. So one of the things that we heard just a couple of times that is at the top of this list is that some of the places where we would be asking folks to move schools, those are a lot of multilingual families who have maybe already had to move schools multiple times, or and who maybe are not McKinney-Vento students, but who have just relocated because of they've recently immigrated, or have just had a lot of transitions already. And it's also hard. So that was captured. The sentiment of changing the budget, not the boundaries, has come up several times, and that's actual words from someone in the community. And I think that that has come up in context of people also just being disappointed that the numbers didn't change within this first iteration as much as they had hoped. I think when we're looking at the 5 and 10 year plan, we do get closer to kind of those initial goals that we set. But I think that there's definitely some disappointment in the community. Or just like wishing that it was a bigger change than it is. One of the things that came up from a teacher that I think is helpful to flag, and is just like has brought a lot of questions to me is um, there are students who currently go to King Middle School that would be moved to Lyman Moore. King Middle School has a healthcare clinic in it. And so if they move to Lyman Moore, they would no longer have access to that healthcare option. And I think that that is, yeah, that just came up several times. In addition to students that live in Kennedy Park, walking to Lyman Moore is a different walk than walking to King Middle School. And so that was flagged several times by several parents, multilingual parents, just feeling like, if their kid misses the bus and they don't have an automobile, walking is an option. But if they're walking all the way to Lyman Moore, that could be very prohibitive to them getting to school. This was from a parent who wants things to stay the way that they are. And this came up a couple of times, that parents intentionally chose where they were going to live in the community because of what schools that their child would go to, and just like not wanting to change that plan. Just wanting to echo that when students change a school, it does affect them emotionally and socially. And we heard that a couple of times. Um, this idea, which is similar kind of to the top bullet, but came from a different session, that if we're moving families who are already moving a lot, are we placing a burden on the people who have already moved the most, only to balance out Longfellow? And that the sentiment of really Longfellow being the thing that changed the most came up a decent amount. We heard from some Roe parents that it was unclear why anything actually needed to change for Roe, because the kind of like their numbers currently, they felt like they could stay with. Um, a couple of folks asked if we had gone directly to Parkside families to talk to them about the change to go to Longfellow. I think we did capture some of those families in the multilingual session, but we haven't done a specific session there. Um, it came up in multiple conversations with families that are current out of neighborhood policy. People that utilize that right now are typically white and wealthy, or wealthier than those who don't use it. And then in terms of the opportunities at schools, so thinking about healthcare, another parent raised, is there aftercare and learning works offered at every school? So that's something I think that we could check on to make sure that if a student is, using learning works at one school, that if they got moved, they could use it where they went, or where they moved to. We talked about buying their houses to go to a specific school, and that was a disappointment. Um, uh, the disappointment again. And then we heard just from a lot of families that they would be able to be more supportive of this if their child could just finish at the school that they're at. And how could we make that possible? So is there a waiver process that we could use? Or just like let this plan trickle in over years as opposed to doing it quickly. We acknowledged that there might be transportation challenges to that. And then again, the waiver idea came up. And as some of these things came in, I had a conversation with the superintendent around, this idea of where are we moving students from, and are there, what are the demographics of the students that we might be moving? Again, for anybody that's watching at home, remember this is not a done deal. We are still very much in the process. So I don't want people to hear this and say this is happening because we're still in the process. But of the students that we're moving, 118 of the 193 students we are moving in elementary school are economically disadvantaged. And at the middle school level, that number goes to 71%. And just so you have a comparison, the district is approximately 57% economically disadvantaged. So we do see it's not, on par with where we are. It's higher in both of those levels, which just felt like important information for us to have as we continue to figure out what our recommendations are. So at this point, I would love to open it up to any questions about the feedback that we've heard. Board member Lena, I know you've been in a lot of those questions and or conversations, and superintendent as well. So if there's anything that you feel like, any big things that we missed, please feel free to speak up, or anybody else on the call, if there's things that you've heard. I just want to capture all of that. So I'll write on some stickies while folks tell me what they've heard.
Sarah, I'll just jump in real quick and
Great.
add a couple of things, which I would say that the two schools that have expressed feeling the most impacted are Longfellow and Ocean. So not just Longfellow, but Longfellow and Ocean. I would say second that I think your bullets pretty well capture them. The emphasis on the bullets depends on the school and the community pretty significantly. And so while the list does a good job of capturing all of them, I think they vary depending on if it's a family that's impacted by the move and their particularly that feeling of change and what that does to a student is particularly emphasized. And so there's trade-offs there.
Thank you.
I'll hold my other comments. Ariel put in the chat about reviewing again the leader feedback, but I'll wait to do that when you want to.
Beautiful. Umaya says that she doesn't have anything else to add at this time. What else? Yeah, Damon, go ahead.
Yeah, I've heard some positive feedback, so I just wanted to throw that on here about two specific changes. One is the one in Libbytown to move that portion to the east of 295 to Reiki from Row. People in the neighborhood that I've heard from are supportive of that for a variety of reasons, mostly because it's much closer and easier to get to. So the other one I've heard is the people in that, I think we were calling it the Deering Triangle, moving from Talbot to Longfellow. There was at least one person who was very supportive of that at the Lincoln listening session. And I think, so I just wanted to highlight those two kind of changes did jump out as having positive support, I guess. And then I think you did a great summary and captured, I've heard the same thing about some of the other changes and people who are not as supportive of some of those.
And just to go back, Damon, on the Deering Triangle, you heard that someone is supportive as the plan is now, or is asking for a change? Okay.
No, they like the plan that's been
that we
recommended
flipped
by the
it.
committee. Okay. Yep, they've just said the same thing we came conclusion that we came to, that it just made sense transportation wise and community wise, neighborhood wise.
Oh, I didn't remember. A parent asked us to relook at Noyes Street because there's a split there that splits the street, and asked if that could be looked at again. What else?
And just to be clear, the Libbytown one, they're supportive of our recommendation. So I just want to make sure that's
great.
That's
Thank
clear.
You.
That's what.
Yep.
So that's what our recommendation was.
Thank you for clarifying.
So I have not, to be very honest, I heard a lot of negative feedbacks coming from staff, especially staff at Reiki, saying that their changes did not change it a lot in their school sizing and their classrooms are still too big and things like that. Their numbers are still high, so their population is not going to change as much. I also heard from multiple families that came in to meet with me and talk about specific cases after the multilingual sessions. And I was able to analyze their cases, and you could definitely see that the families that will, if we move forward with this, will need to move are families that has already moved at least twice. And their kids in elementary school have been to 2 different schools and now would be going to a 3rd school. So it is a lot of changes for families, and that's what is worrying them the much. So I do agree with that number that says that 118 of 193, I do think it reflects the reality of what it is right now. A lot of the population that will suffer the burden will be the economically disadvantaged.
Thank you, Priscilla.
Go ahead. I got you.
Can you all
Oh.
hear me?
Yes-ish. Go ahead.
I'm in the same room as a superintendent. So
Oh, okay, we can hear.
I remember at the school board meeting, Chair Lenz, one of our student representatives brought up the question of how the students that live in the east end of Portland are currently split for middle school, and just what she called the toe of the east end goes to Moore, and her question was, could those students go to King for the walkability sake? And she was asking more questions about that.
Thank you. And we have board member Ali with us, which you're welcome to jump in with a question. Go ahead, or thought. that you
Yeah.
heard.
Hey guys, thank you so much for being able just having me. So I'm actually here because I kind of someone pulled me in and kind of discussed some of the things that they thought were issues and whatnot, but obviously I don't know them as issues just yet because I haven't really dug into it. I have taken a look, but I'd really appreciate the 61%, that 71%, that clarifies a lot. I just a quick, recap. Is the reason why we're redistricting because of the financial piece that it's inequitable in the schools, or is it because of race population?
So
And
the goal. Oh, go ahead.
race population as well as disadvantage balances.
So the goals of this committee were to look at the balancing utilization across schools, so that resources could be invested more equitably, and then also to look at economically disadvantaged rates and to try to balance those as well. Of those 2 factors, we found that balancing utilization is the easier of the 2 without having to bus kids far. But even in these proposals, there are students that will be going to that are being proposed to go to a school that is further away than the ones they are right now.
Okay. And you said balancing. Can you explain that part, like that little piece of it, what the balancing?
Yeah, I'm trying to, so some schools right now have, are being utilized at like 65%, and other schools are being utilized at 78%, right? And so those schools, in the ways that they are staffed and in the ways that they have opportunities built into them are different. Right. And also, regardless of utilization, like every school has to have a certain number of of staff, right? You've got to have a building leader, you've got to have a custodian, you've got to have a nurse or librarian, like, right? You've got basics in every school, but the experience of students in a school that has a high utilization rate versus a lower one is different. So we're trying to, that is a lever that we're trying to equalize or balance as much as we can.
So in Reiki, for example, it's high utilization because of the percentages are high. But does the funding change depending on population or utilization percentages?
Yeah, so the way that the funding changes right now is around things like providing additional ed techs in Title I schools, or having a multilingual social worker or additional social worker. Things like that have been the additional adds to schools. But we've also talked about that moving forward, we have to figure out other levers within the budget to support schools, because it's, even in this proposal, we see that we're not able to really balance economically disadvantaged rates as much as we want to. So then what other levers do we have to provide more supports in schools where those numbers are higher?
Okay, and just last thing, do you have an Excel sheet where everything's kind of?
Yes, we can get that to you for sure. Beautiful. Yeah, Dr. Warren?
Sorry, I'm having technical issues, so I'm using multiple devices here.
That's okay.
So the sort of concern around why do our schools actually even need to be a part of this because it's so small? I heard that from the Lyseth community, and it was sort of it was speaking to both Lyseth and Presumpscot. Is there a way to leave these two schools out? Knowing, understanding that that might not be fair or palatable for a lot of reasons, but just kind of why. And I think that sort of led into a bigger question around why are we doing this? Is it worth it? Which I think I heard you say earlier, but just to reinforce that was one of the questions that came up, is if the changes are going to be relatively small in terms of balancing out economic disadvantage, numbers, then is it worth making the change? Specific to the Lyseth catchment area, there was concern around the little sort of triangle that's been carved out on Main Avenue, which cuts right through a neighborhood where, kids all take the bus together, they play together. So it's kind of an awkward cut.
Is it Maine, like the state, or Maine,
Yeah,
like
the
not
state.
the state? Okay.
Yeah. And if I remember right, I don't have it in front of me. I think it maybe is like 34 students that were affected. So it's not a huge number, but it would be, hard for the people, obviously, as in any situation, it would be hard. But I think because of the way that line was drawn, it would be especially challenging. And then the other thing I just wanted to make sure was captured from the multilingual session was the concern raised around how far families from the East End would have to travel to get out to more, and that they may not have the ability to do that if their child was at school there, not being able to easily get their kids or go out for after school activities or whatever.
Anything else?
Oh, one last thing. I like the map that y'all created. As I zoomed out of Miro, and it's such a great tool, but it doesn't like show the different areas, or I mean, I'm sorry, it shows the different areas, but it doesn't have it labeled, I think.
Yeah, I will. As soon as the superintendent's going to start presenting soon, and I'll see if I can get you a new set of maps, the ones that we've been circulating in the community, because I think it'll give you what you're looking for.
Awesome. Thank you guys. Appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Okay, So, and I just want to say to anybody that watches this recording or, is here watching now, but you can still submit feedback about this process or kind of the maps, the proposal as it is. You can email the board, you can email the superintendent, and we'll continue to feed that into the committee as we move along in the process. So let's go ahead and here we're going to do our first round of feedback and reflection. So this is kind of a different version of the questions that we used early in the process. And I would love if folks could kind of like think on their own about these for just a few minutes before we start sharing. But here are some questions that I think that we can start to think about, which is what people or groups are advantaged or positively impacted by this proposal, what people or groups might be adversely affected. Are there any new inequities that have been covered in the feedback process? Are there any unintended consequences that will be created? And do you have proposed changes or adjustments? And some of these things we got in that last section. And so I'll just copy the Post-its and bring them down. But I would just ask folks, if you're comfortable using Miro, you can, grab a Post-it and start filling them in. If you want to use the chat, I can copy and paste Post-its in, but I would like for us to take some time individually to contribute to this before we open up conversation. Yeah, and just a reminder, if you haven't used Miro lately, you can come over to the left-hand side and click on that sticky note, and it will give you a bunch of colors, and you can choose it and then bring it right over. And I'm just going to come up here and grab some.
I'm sorry, I'm having a really hard time typing here.
That is totally fine. If you want to put it in the chat, I can grab it and move it over for you. Or you
Okay.
can also just feel free to take your time. Great. And Ali, just in case you didn't see them in the chat, there's some links that the superintendent just put in, and those are links to the most recent boundaries, like the proposal that is being used in the community right now.
I don't know if you can hear me, but my computer's moving mad slow, so I did catch that, I think.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So you can keep, let's see. I see your note, Priscilla. Let me get it into a sticky for you. Okay, Priscilla, I got them for you. Anybody else, feel free to put a message into the chat and we can add them. I'm just going to zoom us in here. So people or groups that are advantaged or positively impacted by this proposal, elementary schools going to the same middle school, such as East End, that is a positive. Students in Libbytown area and Deering Triangle, there's a positive impact. Students and parents are moved into a walkable school. Yeah. Overall, there'll be a more equal experience at middle schools. Any new inequities that have been uncovered? Some people have more ability to buy into a school district than others. Yeah. There was an earlier map that showed a section of Libbytown being bused to East End. The committee strongly opposed this because of the neighborhood school idea. However, these maps show students in Parkside being bused to Longfellow and Ocean. Yeah, so I think that, and like the Kennedy, is it Kennedy that goes to Lyman Moore, the big loop? Yes, I think that we haven't quite held neighborhood schools across the whole proposals. Legacy of redlining and exclusionary zoning has created structural inequities that make our task here very challenging without disruptions to transportation and neighborhoods. Thank you for naming that. I think that has been, I've just been like revisiting more about that, and the way that we have been building housing in the city does make it it makes it harder, right? Because when we have these concentrated areas of people who are economically disadvantaged, it makes it really hard to spread out that inequities. People approved due out of neighborhood waivers are not low income class and does not have the challenges of transportation. That's right. So I think we have to keep that in mind when we think about any exemptions or waivers, that kind of thing. Any unintended consequences, potential loss of healthcare for some students who wouldn't have that if they moved away from King, splitting Parkside into 3 schools, loss of a neighborhood school. Middle school scenarios are challenged due to transportation policies. Potentially metro, putting middle schoolers on metro buses could solve that. And then proposed changes that have come up, add the section south of Warren Ave to Longfellow, relook at Noyes Street, look at the south area south of the highway that now goes to Longfellow, Main Ave, East End Toe. Consider what areas will require transportation regardless of school, that have no walkable school. I think that's a great point. Focus on 4 changes with positive support, road to Reiki, Deering Triangle, basic clean it up, and making middle schools consistent with either the more limited boundary changes. Consider dropping the other elementary boundary changes. Beautiful. Okay, so I think that these are a lot of things that are being generated here for us to think about. You can, as we continue to go through kind of the policy and budget pieces, you can keep these questions in mind and add thoughts as you want to. You can. We're also going to hopefully have time to come back to this list at the end of tonight's session to just keep putting those thoughts out. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Superintendent Scallon. Superintendent, do you want me to keep sharing my screen, or you want to do it?
No, it's fine. You can share. Could
Okay,
you
great.
actually just do me a favor and
Yeah.
scoot down a little bit
Yeah.
so that we can see the leader feedback?
Yeah, we'll start there.
There we go. I couldn't figure out how to make a white background on this, so we're going to go with the gray. The feedback in this is the same feedback I shared last time, but it's helpful to put in the space as we're thinking about this, is I had met with all of our leaders and across the board, just extremely appreciative of the work and the challenge that the committee faces. And the way that they describe it, and I think you guys think about it, is that the tug and pull of the 5 priorities and trying to balance all 5 of them in the work. I would say that there were 3 groups of school leaders. There were some school leaders that saw no problem and were okay with the change. There were some leaders who felt like the boundaries did not do enough to address the issues of utilization and socioeconomic to have the desired impact. I think somebody voiced that earlier, maybe it was Priscilla, about Reiki as an example of that, where they felt like the changes were not significant enough to have a desired impact. So directionally right, but not scale-wise. There was concern about disruption for those impacted. This was both for overall students, as well as particularly students that have moved multiple times in their school career. And so concerned about that. There was a little bit that came up around staffing impact that this may have, so that if there's significant changes in size of a school, that we would see staff necessary to shift from one school to another. That's something that we see now, just based on enrollment patterns, but that would potentially have a significant impact in this one year. And leaders asked to see solutions that leverage policy, budget, staffing, as they thought that those areas could potentially have more of an impact. That comment reminded me a lot of something McKay said early in this process and throughout, that there are decisions that are around boundaries and where boundaries are, and then there are other levers, those being policy, budget, and staffing, to also address, and that there's limits on both. And then there were some very school-specific challenges that were identified. So Longfellow has a cafeteria, gymnasium, auditorium, cafeteria, auditorium, gymnasium, whatever you want to call that. And so going above 300 has impact about the number of students that need to have lunch in the classroom as opposed to in the cafeteria. And then the last bullet has been talked about a fair amount here, which is around specific neighborhoods and walkability to new schools. That specifically came up around the change of some parts of East End, not going to King anymore, but now going to Moore. That was probably the most significant example of that, and particular harm on a community that may have less ability to travel on their own. So that was the feedback from leaders. Why don't I just give it a pause for a second and see if there's any question on that? Great. I'm going to take that as a no questions, but happy to take questions later. So I wanted to share areas that in our work, we probably want to encourage the board to look at for potential impact and what it could have on enrollment. And so at the top of this section, I listed 4 policies, 3 that exist now, 1 that is in a very early stage of discussion and may come up, and the possible impact. So I listed both their letters as well as the name. For ease, I'm just going to go with the name. So the first is around admission of non-resident students. So these are students who live in surrounding towns that attend Portland Public Schools, or students that live in Portland Public Schools that attend non-Portland Public Schools. So directionally, it goes both ways. There are approximately 70 students that enter the district from outside schools, and there are approximately 70 students that exit Portland. There are state guidelines that guide this process, and also there is some level of discretion at the school level and for the board. And so if you were to look at students who enter and students who exit, they do follow some racial patterns. So of the 70 students that exit, they are predominantly white. Of the 70 students that enter, they are much more mixed in representation. And so one piece that we could consider is around potentially restricting or thinking more strategically around school placements for out of district students. That's one example of something we can consider. The second is around admission of non-resident tuition students. This has come up some in discussion. Just want to name that this is primarily for the students who come to us through the Maine Educational Center for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing, and so not recommending any potential changes there. The third that's been a discussion, and we'll invite Priscilla to jump in here as this is really the core of her work, is around policy JFABD, which is the education of homeless students. This is the policy that provides the legal requirements and procedures for placement of students. And there are a number of factors that go into placement, but one of the things we could look at and consider is how school start times have an impact on student placement. So at the elementary level, there are families for personal reasons that late start schools are particularly needed, and schools where early starts are particularly needed. It's not universal, one or the other, but there are individual circumstances there. The biggest driver actually is something that came up, which is around looking at expanding before and after school programs and the size of those programs. And for this, I'm both considering REC, which is run by the city, and Learning Works, which is run by the district. For some of our student populations, where schools or which schools have before and after school programs significantly drive where they have interest in attending. Yeah. And just any newspaper article you read recently talks about how there's an ever increasing demand for this and not an ability to meet that. And so that is something that we could look at. The one bullet I skipped there and didn't mean to is we could also look at within that policy providing additional resources at schools when a certain percent is reached. And so this is around providing some targeted support. That could look like a social worker. It could look like a reading specialist. It could be a number of things. I don't want to have it sound like there is a specific need that comes with a student population. It varies significantly, but we could look at that. Economically disadvantaged is what I'm using there for percent ED. But it could also be utilization. And then there has been in the past board discussions around class size. And I think that is something that the policy committee is looking at. And just one idea is consider tying class size to the percent economically disadvantaged in the school. So it's not that all kindergartens have a sort of class guidance of 20, but there's a sliding scale that adjusts. So, Chair, why don't I do the budget connected ones because it's like heavily policy as well. And then we can open it up both to questions and a brainstorm of ideas. With the idea being that what we're really seeding is for Chair Lentz, board members Ali, board member Myelina, and the others that follow this, ideas that they could be taking to the policy committee or to the budget work that's coming up. So there are budget connected practices that currently consider student demographic factors. There are practices that do not consider them. And there are some changes that I think we'd love to see and move in this direction. It's a competing priority piece that plays out at some level. So some of our current practices that do not consider student demographics. When we look at teaching staff for a school, and you consider 2 elementary schools, the teaching staff, their core classrooms, are driven by class size guidelines. So it is a simple division, and every student is considered and thought of as the exact same. And so what that can do is sometimes have class sizes that are pretty small and some classes that are right at the cap because it's a pure division exercise. Guidance counselors and social workers are generally provided by school and size, but there is some factor with social workers in the last budget that looked at the percent of low-income students in the school. Coordinators, so special education coordinators, culture coordinators, instructional coaches, and interventionists have been primarily based on school size. And so a school like Presumpscot or Longfellow that are smaller have historically sometimes split some of these positions or had a person that wears 2 hats. Current practices which do consider student needs and school demographics. So federal funding, our overall federal funding. So these are title funds, Title I, II, III, and IV. They're about $8 million of a $171 million budget this year. So between 4 and 5% of the overall budget. They are for Title I funds, which is about $2.5 million. They are allocated based on school need at the elementary level, only at the elementary level. Kindergarten education technicians were added in this last budget only to Title I schools to support reading. Social workers for Breathe programs, and as I shared before, a little bit around socioeconomic. And then ESOL and special education teachers are driven almost exclusively by the number of multilingual learners and the number of students with IEPs. Some ideas that have come up in both conversations centrally as well as with community members are listed below. So there's 4 I'm just going to walk through real quick. So one is to take the idea of title funding and actually set aside some more of our local or taxpayer-raised funding to act similar to Title I. So even though we get $2.5 million from the federal government, perhaps we set aside another $2.5 million in our local budget and treat it the same as Title I funding. And so then it would be allocated based on economically disadvantaged. I already shared the class size one. Third idea is to provide reading interventionists in all of the elementary schools driven on economically disadvantaged percentage or on reading test scores. This would be primarily an investment. And then for any of these changes where we talk about potentially adding staff, we need to consider about where the trade-off is and where we consider having fewer staff. And that's just the reality that we all face every day with our budget and needing to find a balance. And so right now we have a fair number of staff that sort of are automatically staffed to a school, right? Every school has a principal, an assistant principal, a special education coordinator, a culture coordinator, except our very smallest schools, an instructional coach, those types of positions. And so we could look at not automatically staffing those positions and to free up some of the funds for the bullets above. And so that is something where I say that just to name that. Maya put in the chat just a question around what is the percent economically disadvantaged to qualify for Title I. So I don't know the exact number on it. What I can tell you is that our school that is the lowest that gets some funding, but not nearly the same amount as a Reiki or an East End, is Lyseth. And I think Lyseth is 30-something%, but I'm doing that from memory. Hey, 35.9,
superintendent.
that's pretty good.
And is, you know, so with title funding, like we've applied it historically in different ways. Like, are you saying that Lyseth itself qualifies as a Title I school, or they just get some of the funding that we get?
So we get funding as a district. And then we have historically made a choice to only apply title funds at the elementary level, right? It's a limited amount of funds. So the more you spread it out across schools, the more diluted it becomes. And I don't remember the exact reason, but the lowest school that gets funding is Lyseth.
Okay.
So that's where it is. Longfellow does not receive any title funding. But that again is like, that's something where we could make a different decision. You have to, by law, do it based on a ranking of what their percent is, right? So your lowest school can't receive more money than your highest. So that's the one piece, but we could make some choices to change on that.
Okay. Yeah, Priscilla, go ahead.
So if we move forward with this plan of the boundaries, would this change for the beginning of the year or no? Like Longfellow, they will be receiving a lot of students. Would they possibly be receiving some title funding or no?
So I think that part of it would be dependent on the implementation plan that we put together as a recommendation. So when that starts, that's actually a great thing to flag though, because we're going to be into budgeting before we have this totally the implementation plan. So it would likely mean that there was like a staggering that would have to happen. I don't know, Superintendent, what do you think about that?
The question is whether or not a school would qualify for title. Is that the question? Priscilla, can you just say your question?
If the budgeting would take place in 2026 also.
Yeah, I mean, I think we want to make sure that any changes that we're making align with the budget, right? Because if we're going to make these changes, we will get the most positive impact if we align budget at the same time. And we align staffing at the same time.
So ideally, this boundary work needs to be determined and ready to be presented before the budget starts, which is February. Am I wrong?
So it will, like, we start working on it in December with the schools. So the idea is to get the recommendations to the board at the latest in December.
Okay.
So it's going to be a tight turnaround.
I will say that when it comes to title funds, if you were to go with the scenario that is currently on the table, Longfellow would not qualify for title funds. Lyseth is in this interesting spot where it had been brought in because of historical receiving of it. It has become less socioeconomically disadvantaged over the years. And so it is still by state level able to receive it because of historical, but would perhaps come off.
Thank you for that. And I think again, I just continue to be grateful for highlighting the trade-offs, right? Because there are going to have to be, just as the way that we're trading off within the priorities of our work here when we think about the budget. Because the way the budget works right now is just even to take the budget that we have this year and roll it over to next year, there are going to likely be increased costs just because that is the world that we live in right now. And so, to offset that, it means having to make tough choices sometimes. So just to get that on everybody's radar as well. So I'm curious, you know, with this information that we now have in front of us about these, like, does anybody have questions or thoughts that are coming up or ideas?
I do. I just don't know if it's. I will ask, but feel free to tell me that this is not part of this work. Um, Ryan, so I know, I'm aware, I'm not really familiar 100%, but I'm aware that the school does have legally to reserve some title funds for a McKinney-Vento, right? Set aside. We are talking about the policy, we're talking about, I think we have to face it, it's time to face it, that our district is 12% of students experiencing homeless right now. Do you think that part of the proposal could also include, like, set aside more funds in case there's a need throughout the year to add additional staff to support the McKinney-Vento students in particular schools?
I mean, I don't remember what the exact set aside is just at the moment, but it's pretty small.
Mhm.
And so I think that goes to this idea of perhaps leveraging additional funds to act similar to title, right? Whether it is for McKinney-Vento set aside, whether it is for some staff that are fluid, right? So that they get placed a little bit later in the year once we know things have settled a little bit, those kind of ideas.
Okay.
But yeah, I think those are the completely, Priscilla, the ideas that we want to hear, right? In this point is things like increase the McKinney-Vento set aside.
Yeah, from my understand for McKinney-Vento so far, we do not look into like fluid, like you said. It's basically like what is needed for next year. So that amount is set aside. So after the year starts, we usually don't have any funds left because that is to cover the staff that we originally think that it's needs to be implemented. So that I like the idea of leaving some funds set aside in case something comes up towards the middle of the school year.
Dr. Warren, or Superintendent Scallon, I'm curious if either of you could speak to, like, space constraints. You know, I think as we're thinking about class size, we had a conversation a couple of years ago where we looked at, you know, costing out to add additional classrooms, but then we realized that, like, it actually, like, we don't have enough space to do it consistently across the district. And I was just curious if anybody could talk to, like, top level, the space constraints around what we might see.
Yeah, I can. So you can actually see this if you go way back to the capacity maps and the discussion we had there, where there were rooms set aside at the bottom of each of the schools that said set aside for like additional flex, I think was the term that was used. That gives you a little sense of where you have space to be able to expand. It wasn't a huge number of rooms. And so what you'll also see factor into this is other decisions like where pre-K classrooms are, where specialized programs are, and even how we may leverage extra space in the middle schools and high schools.
Okay.
Just to give like a real concrete example, I don't think this is a school that's necessarily in that discussion, but it was 2 summers ago that we were looking at Lyseth and what it would mean if they added a classroom for their Spanish immersion.
Right.
Or to maintain the Spanish immersion as it was, because their kindergarten was growing. And I think it was about $100,000 for one modular, with some pretty significant work required, because you
Yeah.
have to have sprinklers, et cetera. And so some of our schools have some flex, and Lyseth was pretty tight.
Yeah. Thank you for that. What other questions are coming up for people or thoughts? Yeah, go ahead, Damon.
Yeah, I guess a question about going back to some of the school leader feedback and then thinking about the budget. I'm just wondering if the utilization numbers need some kind of caveat. Maybe I know we have this column called functional capacity, but maybe there needs to be an adjustable functional capacity or something to reflect some of the additional cushion that's needed, or safety valve or whatever it is we're going to call it, um, to provide for some of the adjustments you're talking about. And then also, I think going back to what you said about Longfellow, where their cafeteria there's some threshold effects, I guess, where the cafeteria size impacts the function of the school in an important way. And I guess I wonder if there's a way that we can capture some of those important thresholds, maybe, or make some adjustments to create a better guideline for ideal capacity, I guess, as opposed to the true hard limit. Does that make sense to people?
Damon, that makes sense. I will say, and we'll go back and talk to school leaders and look at the maps for where this may be. I will say that the one place it really came up was Lyseth, or not Lyseth, excuse me, at Longfellow, because of the one main space that is used for all of them. Things like art room, music, they are in there. And held aside. But if there were significant changes in school size, then we'd have to look at those as well. Just if we had to add an art teacher or a music teacher, that kind of thing.
Other thoughts or questions?
Yeah, who can because I want to have a meeting with someone that whoever's creating like the maps and a lot of the data and things like that. But who's the best person to just like have an hour meeting with them so I can.
Well, I think you and I could probably sit down, or you and superintendent could sit down to just start there and then see what other questions you have, and we could get you answers.
All right, cool, thank you.
Yeah, of course, of course. One of the things that I didn't capture in the feedback, but is popping into my mind right now, just as another consideration as we continue to make this Rubrik's Cube even more complicated, is just circling back around CDS, and if we know any more information about space needs that might come with that. And for those who maybe don't know what I'm talking about, we're taking over from the state 3 and 4-year-olds, getting them assessed and any services that they need. And it's been kind of like trickling information out of the state. And so at the beginning of this process, we didn't have a lot of information. I don't know if we have any more at this point.
So we know a lot more, but we don't know enough to have for me to tell you something meaningful. I mean, what I will say is, we're very deep in it right now. We've had one significant meeting with the state. We've got another one, I think, next week. But we're just really digging in and trying to understand what's required and what's possible. And we'll figure out the space from there. We will certainly need to have ways to screen and evaluate students. We may well need more classroom space for some students, but I can't really give you anything that's probably going to be very helpful at the moment. Sorry.
No, that's okay. That's okay. That's a helpful update. Okay, any other questions or thoughts that are coming up for folks? Yeah, Rob, go ahead.
I guess this is kind of like a general question, but will we have like a snapshot of the budgetary impact of our proposal? Either for us or for the school board when it's presented to them?
That's a great question. I was just starting to talk to the superintendent about that last week. But yeah, go ahead, superintendent.
We will. I don't think our analysis will capture all costs or all savings, just because some of the things will happen on the margins, like very closely to how student enrollment falls, right? That 21st kid in kindergarten right now is a pretty expensive addition to a school. But right now, part of the work that McKay is doing is McKay is now going to receive the 25-26 enrollment and add it onto this, so that we can look at how many fourth graders are there that would be in fifth grade, and seventh graders in eighth grade, those kind of decisions where there's been a lot of discussion around what this would mean. And then the one other thing I would say is that there's a lot of implementation decisions that significantly impact cost. So transportation just being one of them. So yes, we will do as much as we can. And some of it will be hard to estimate.
Yeah. A lot of moving parts.
Yep.
Thanks,
Well,
Rob.
thank you.
Board Member Lena, go ahead.
My question is, will the committee be giving a recommendation to the board no matter what? Like, maybe we are giving a recommendation of these boundary maps. Maybe we're giving a recommendation of what to look at for policy. Like, is the expectation that there will be a recommendation no matter what? Or is it that we can make a decision within here and then no recommendation?
Yeah, so the recommendation could be, we recommend no changes. Or it could be, we recommend these policy changes, or it could be, we recommend these policy and boundary changes. But there should be a recommendation at the end of this for the board to consider and vote on. But what that looks like is still up to us.
When is the end of this? Do we have a
That's a very good question, which is, so we have one more meeting on the books to look at a lot of like student numbers and implementation pieces. And then I was going to ask if people would consider an in-person longer meeting or we could do it virtually. I just think in person sometimes can be a little bit easier, and we could use like real life stickies on walls to create the final set of recommendations. So that's what I was going to ask. So technically it will be hopefully by the end of, wait, am I saying that wrong? By the end of November, superintendent, or should it be mid-November? What did we?
The last meeting's the end of November. So.
Right. Okay. So it would probably be after that, but to get it to the board in December. Is there anyone who would not be able to, I mean, it would obviously depend on the date and the timing, but is there anyone that has initial hesitations to one last kind of bigger meeting to come up with recommendations?
I like the idea, but I'm not seeing it on my calendar. When is the date of the November meeting?
Ariel, I just said that exact same thing on mute. I was like, I'm looking, I don't see it. It would like normally fall on Thanksgiving, and so we could go on either side of it. So we could go the 27th, we could go the 13th. McKay, would you be able to do 25-26 enrollment by then? If it was the 13th?
It would be, well, we don't have the data yet. So we would be able to do, I think we would be able to geocode the students and do current enrollment. I don't know if we would have time to get a forecast QA, QC it. So, but you'd have updated baseline, which would be helpful regardless. So I think if everything goes well with that, it really just depends on the data and how fast we can get it geocoded. But I have faith that we could get that by the 13th. to at least give you a snapshot of baseline data from 2025.
So we'll add that to calendars very quickly. So I'm hearing the next meeting will be on the 13th. Is that what I'm hearing?
I defer to you, Chair, on what you want. I just wanted to check with McKay about whether or not the earlier worked.
Yeah.
I'm sure McKay would prefer the 27th.
I think that we need to leave that week to do a bigger, fuller meeting with everybody, and we can send out a doodle or something to get that time set, because I think I know that time of year starts to get really busy for folks. So we'll send out a doodly thing and see if we can find a place where we get most folks available.
The 27th is Thanksgiving, but there's also the 20th.
Thank you. Thank you for.
You're right. I
filling me
read
in
my
on it.
calendar wrong. Thank you.
I was wondering that too. Another question. I'm wondering if it's possible to do an in-person only meeting so that I know hybrid is a good
Yes.
option for a lot of these meetings, but for this particular purpose, I do wonder if we should all be in the same place, if that's possible to do. I don't know if McKay can, if you can come in for that or not, but at least all the other members of the committee who are local.
I agree. I like doing either or. I think hybrid is hard to integrate everybody's voices and perspectives into. So I would, echo that as well. So yes, the 13th would be a virtual with totally virtual. And then we will, like, I just think also like I'm the 20th, I don't know for sure if we should do the 20th or the 27th yet. So can we doodle, and then also just like the length of time? I think we need at least, I would say 3 hours. So I know Ariel, I know. But maybe we
Like
could
in
get dinner.
the evening, like 6 to 9.
What do people think about what is the best set of 3 hours that people would want to entertain? I mean, we could also do a weekend, which I know is not fun, but could people do a 5 to 8 or 6 to 9? What would be a preference for folks?
So when you say 27, you're saying the week of the 27, which is right before Thanksgiving?
No, so we would not be taking into consideration that week at all because of Thanksgiving. So we would either be looking at the 20th, or when is the board meeting in December? Hold on, the first board meeting. I'm going to stop sharing here for a sec.
The 9th.
The 9th. Okay, so we could do the 4th of December. Oof, that's a tight turnaround.
I know,
Public
I would much
noticing.
rather finish this in November, in my opinion, but
Yeah. So if we did the 13th virtual and then the 20th
in person.
in person, would people prefer to start at 5 or 6? 5? I see 5. Anybody else have a strong opinion?
Unless we're gonna get food at the meeting, I would say 6.
Yeah, I think we provide dinner, Superintendent Scallon? Yeah, we can come out of the board budget. Yeah, so we'll provide dinner and we could
Then
start at
5.
5. Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. Beautiful. My gosh, y'all, does this mean we don't have to send a doodle? Oh, you guys are just a dream. Okay, so 13th, we are doing a virtual regular hour-and-a-half meeting. On the 20th, we'll have a 3-hour in-person meeting at central office with dinner. And our goal were you just shaking your head, Superintendent?
Can we do it at Casco? And I'll just confirm his availability, because then we can broadcast.
The only thing is like I do anticipate it being like an interactive meeting, putting Post-its up on the wall, those kinds of things. So like I'm just not sure what the broadcasting will look like. I also don't love the setup of the board, which is a horseshoe, which we can't see all of each other. And like I just think we have to like ask ourselves like what is I don't know. I want us to be able to be effective as a group, and that feels like my top priority, to get to the best recommendations for the community. And to me, that supersedes having a really clear broadcast to the community. If other folks feel differently, we can, I can reconsider that. I guess my preference would be to be in a room where we could have access to whiteboards and walls where we could be using Post-its and things, and not, we could set up an owl, but that would be the broadcasting.
How about we take this off line? We'll figure out based on timing and what's available, what broadcasting.
Okay. That sounds good to me. Any other thoughts or things that are in people's heads that haven't been said tonight? Okay, so next meeting on the 13th, we're going to be looking into what it will look like for more implementation around student numbers. And then the 20th, we'll have an in-person. We'll get those on the calendar. In the meantime, feel free to continue to just ask community members to email the board. We'll capture those and bring them back to this bigger group and join the engagement sessions. And I think that that's it. So we might finish a few minutes early. Yes, Superintendent, go ahead.
I feel like Priscilla was just like, Ryan. For folks that are watching this at home, as well as for committee members, I think it's worth just naming that there is feedback and a listening session on Wednesday at 6 p.m. at the United Way. And on Thursday, the 30th, at 6 p.m. virtual, and those both exist. And then also, I do anticipate that we'll start to get comments at the board business meetings. And so the board actually has business meetings back to back coming up. And so we have the board session on the, sorry, I'm just playing with my calendar here, make sure I get the days right. We have a board session on the 28th of October, and we have a board session on November 4th. And so both still before the committee makes recommendations, and so opportunities for feedback. And so members who want to give that feedback, public comment happens at the front of those meetings, so pretty close to 6 o'clock. So wanted to share that.
Yes, Ariel, I think that that is a very good point that just came into the chat, that we like to hear feedback of all kinds. So if there's something about this plan that you really like, we'd like to hear that too. Thank you for highlighting that in the chat. Rob, yeah, last thought goes to Rob.
Yes, sorry, this might be like more than I should bring up right now, but like I'm trying to contextualize like the feedback we've gotten and how it compares to other district-wide policies that we've implemented. Is it like a normal amount of feedback or like a smaller amount?
I would say that based on kind of my experience on the board, that it feels like pretty normal. You start to see with any like big district change, you start to see pockets of people who start to organize and amplify their perspective. And I think that's kind of like where we're hitting right now. So it feels similar to me. I don't know if anybody else on the board would like to weigh in on that, but it feels pretty similar.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, great question. All right then. I hope everybody has a good night and finds some more joy, and we will see you on the 13th, if not before then. Take good care.